Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of GP Red Presents. This episode is actually talking about current funding sources that are available for parks and recreation agencies during these trying times of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was having a discussion with Danny Hopkins, who is the Community Services Director for Salem, New Hampshire. He's also a project consultant for Greenplay. And we were talking about these types of sources that are available and decided to invite some great minds to have a broader conversation. So basically what you're seeing here are highlights from a Zoom call with a variety of great minds, including principals and projects and consultants from Greenplay, along with some of our esteemed colleagues from GP Red and who are also working in the field. Please like, subscribe, and comment on this, and let us know if we can bring you other topics that you'd like to hear more about. We're here to support you. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Funding issues are starting to bubble up because a lot of communities for the COVID, and now with the other issues that have arisen most recently regarding some of the bigger cities, the funding issues are becoming a concern with fire and police. Overtime is chopping into some of the budgets, and depending on how the budgets are affected, they affect other departments. I want to talk about three potential funding sources actually that I'm involved with right now in trying to make sure that our budgets for the remainder of this year stay intact and for next year. And the three funding sources, obviously the CARE Act, which is federally allocated to the states, the FEMA, which we've all been involved with, and JAG, which is the Judicial Justice Assistance Grant, which police tap into a lot. So with that, the first one is the CARES Act. Now the CARES Act, basically the way it's structured is the federal government provides state and local funding. Depending on how your state is structured, the allocations can be, in New Hampshire, it's given all to the state, and then the state makes the determination on how it's allocated. So the CARES Act has actually been, for the first part of the stimulus, has actually been used as one of the mechanisms. And as you know, with the federal government, when they like to use the local granting agencies or state granting agencies to disperse the funds, and that's what's happened in New Hampshire. So there's different categories, and it basically tells you you can use this to address a lot of the COVID issues. And people may say, why, what can Parks and Rec, how they can tap into this? And if you look at the next slide, it basically gives different categories. There's, for childcare, for secondary school, a lot of these components we are involved with one way or the other, but the money is substantial that's being allocated this year. These are the four states that I have actually been a department director over the past 25 years, 30 years. So in New Hampshire, there's $1.2 billion of allocations. The town of Salem, which we're 30,000 plus people, their allocation is about $600,000. We've already spent about $350,000 primarily in police and fire overtime. So, and there's two more rounds of reimbursements. The first round of reimbursements was just done, and the second round of reimbursements will be June 30th when you apply for it. And what they're doing is they're being very flexible. You can actually reach back on the second and third round to the first round if you forgot to put something in it. So at least that's how it's in New Hampshire, but some of the other states. But if you look at some of the allocations, Wake County and North Carolina, I was a parks director in Cary, North Carolina, but they're getting $194 million, and King County, where Redmond is getting 393 million, and Florida, Miami-Dade is getting about 474 million dollars. So why I'm bringing this up is if directors, you know, that you work with, they may or may not be in that conversation with either their managers or their administrators, and they need to be in there with them. And my biggest, when I've worked in Parks and Recreation, I've always kept a close relationship with police and fire. And in fact, what we did this past several months, one of my facilities was used as the Emergency Operations Center, which will get reimbursement for some of the costs for setting that up. And, you know, after this is all over, we'll have additional computers and some other things that we've tapped into. But I just wanted to give you, I just picked these 4 states, but on the website, they have actually local breakdowns even farther than this. So as you can see, the money is very substantial. And how it's allocated, the directors need to know how it's allocated and what they can tap into. And there's a bunch of different categories. We have what is called in New Hampshire, the Gopher. I didn't put it up here because it's very state specific, but the Gopher Act. And basically that tells you all the categories that you can use this funding source for. It can be used for people that, like I'm working outside of my job class as a Parks and Recreation, as a community service director, I'm assisting EOC. So all of that time that I work with EOC is reimbursed into the budget. Any of the folks that are in my department that I reassign to do COVID-related either education, modifying programs, and traditionally under their mission, we can attempt to apply for reimbursement. And so what a lot of local agencies are doing is they're applying for reimbursement under the CARE Act, and whatever doesn't get paid by the CARE Act, then they're going to FEMA. So this is for the FEMA funding. As I said, emergency operations can be reimbursed. Any type of disinfectant, you know, a lot of the communities we're benefiting because we're buying disinfectant sprayers, and we're working closely with you know, both police and fire. When they buy equipment, they buy it in bulk and they allocate it to the rest of the departments. So the next one is the JAG. I don't know if people have worked on the JAG, Justice Assistance Grant Program, but this is a very well-funded program. And so on FEMA, how we're benefiting from that, a lot of our retrofitting, all our signage, all our modifications, additional picnic tables for social distancing, a lot of that stuff that we're actually hopefully getting reimbursed from either the CARES Act or the FEMA Act. We're trying to do that. But with JAG, what we've partnered with them is on a bunch of different projects. One of them right now is we applied for a grant in joint with the police department for hiring an officer or officers to deal specifically with the elder population. Salem has an elder population pretty significant, about I'd say about 15 to 20% of our population are 16 over. So we're applying for a grant there. But those are the 3 funding sources that just came to mind real quick and getting ready for here that assist folks, because what we're going to be dealing with is priorities for this next budget year, and how this year we can balance our budgets, and for next year to look at what needs to be done in the future to assist Parks and Recreation and Community Services to get, you know, go into the future without being too winged by you know, this economic pressures that we're dealing with. There was a talk on the federal level for a 4th stimulus that was going to help out state and local governments. That has been pretty much put on hold. So there's going to be some challenges as far as next budget year. Right now, what we're experiencing, and you can see it in the stock market, this year we're experiencing a lot of liquidity. There's a lot of money being pumped into a lot of the issues. That's eventually going to go away. So when that goes away, then the realities will start hitting. And I anticipate it to be in this coming 2021 is going to be a challenge for local and state budgeting. But as far as the reimbursement for the CARES Act, it is pretty extensive, in that computer software for working at home, entities. We are purchasing a number of laptops to have people work at home and be in the office. Any modifications to any structures right now, we're going through a building audit right now to implement a lot of social distancing, hand sanitizing stations, barriers, any type of modification to promote social distancing. So when there's a norm to get back, that norm will be physically inviting to folks. So we have again, signage, automatic doors, just a bunch of stuff as far as building and facility maintenance issues that can be facility modifications that can be tapped into. Also, like I said, if what we do is we're helping out the finance department and we're helping out the clerk's office. We're a small town, so there are people that are dealing with COVID issues, whether it's somebody at home that's in a high risk category, so they're either working from home or they can't work. And so I'm allocating staff to assist those other departments, and that funding can be reimbursed through the CARES Act. So Parks and Recreation or Community Services, what we're looking at as far as moving forward is how do we learn from the past 3 months, and how do we structure our program offerings, our facilities and stuff to be flexible and adaptable, which we've already been doing that as an industry in the past, but even more so now.
This is Pat. I might jump in based on what Danny said about being at the table. Our local city put together 2 different emergency response teams a few months ago. And from the folks I know personally on the Parks and Rec staff, it started out as a bummer because they were trying to assign, instead of go home orders, they were taking on new roles, additional hours on this team. And as it turned out, the smart ones figured out that was a great place to be and a great place to spend their time versus, and these were a lot of people that ran facilities that were closed. So even though they were paying them for the next 2 months, they were trying to give them something, again, they call it essential to do. And the outcome of it was Parks and Rec got a lot of slices of that pie because they had, I'm going to say 6 out of 12 on one of the teams. And they were from the director and the superintendents and managers levels that all talked about how much revenue they were losing and how much participation in outdoor parks were going up. And they just used all the statistics that they had locally. So they spent their time justifying and sitting in these meetings that most people were thinking, God, I'm glad I'm not there, but it paid off. So I think rather than sit around sometimes like we see in the budget times and hope for the best, crowd your way on the tables is what I'm suggesting. Elbow in.
One of the things that I just want to mention is what's been brought to light, and it's the COVID thing, outside of it being overshadowed by all of the turmoil that we're dealing with currently, but with regard to the COVID, is how important certain components of our mission are. Mental health, day camp, childcare, after-school programs. When we do get back to work in full force, which is hopefully in the next couple months, what has brought at least to the awareness of, and it's been on the national news, is how important those day camps are and those after-school programs are. And so we especially in the communities where you have the lower socioeconomic impacts, we need to make sure that those programs are or fortified. However we do it, I don't know, but we have to be in that conversation. And also the open space, how important that was for people that were cooped up to be able to walk on a bike ped cart, or people that were able to go to a larger, the first thing we opened up here in New Hampshire were they call them the interior parks, the larger regional parks, and how important those were. And those are the things that we just need to not forget when we move forward.
I would agree, Danny. And again, some of that foot in the door was in 2 clients that I have, they use their rec staff to man additional childcare for hospital first responders and what have you. And it was free of charge. Therefore, they needed the money. So, of course, they got on that list of grants to get that money.
And to piggyback on what Pat was mentioning, that's something that the City of Alexandria Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Activities have been very strategic about doing. So when we first got mention of closing, we knew that our Department of Community and Health Services would be up and running. And we provided a lot of support to them. And so what we were able to do, as you mentioned, with tracking funding, keeping track of all the spending that we did that was COVID related. So when a lot of our surrounding jurisdictions were laying off their seasonal employees, we actually committed to paying them until at least the next fiscal year. But we've started a emergency child care center. So people who have to go to work, the essential workers, would have child care. I don't know if there was a fee attached to it or not, but as we look at going to phase 2, we're making sure that we're providing child care in summer camps for people who are receiving free or reduced lunch or TANF. And then after we, fill those spaces, which will be very limited, we may open it up to the general public. But we realize that there's going to be a demand because, like I said, all the local jurisdictions are not offering summer camps. So we actually have put ourselves in a very good position to not only provide services during the COVID time, but to also remain, being able to meet our community's needs as we gradually go into the different phases. So like I said, just providing that support. We opened a shelter. We staffed their phone services and operated as translators. So we were very visible to the community and got a lot of support from our city manager and fiscal resources as well. But like you said, just keeping track of it. I know as we start going into phase 2, we're looking at cost of disinfectant, installing the plexiglass. We're getting rid of our emergency pay, which was like an additional $4 premium when you came into work, and that'll end in June. But just making sure that we keep track. So the CARE Act that you mentioned, I will definitely look into that because I think that's going to be a great resource specifically for us who's providing that direct care to essential workers. So thank you for that.
Deborah, you bring up a good point. One of the things that we have to look at, even a lot of parks and recreation programs have what's called the recreation fund, which is usually the fee-based recreational programming. And what we're implementing here in Salem is we're providing a lot of virtual or open air program activities, and we're having a reduced fee or no fee for customer retention. Because when things go back to normal, we want, like we have a preschool. So we have 18 families involved in this preschool. So we're doing virtual learning, which a lot of schools are doing, and we're doing it at no charge. And then we're going to run a virtual camp over the summer with a self-directed field trip each at the end of each week. But we're charging for arts and crafts supplies. We're not charging for the staff supply, the cost. So that program usually makes a little bit of money. Now we're going to lose some money, but for customer retention and to stay relevant, we have to look beyond today. We have to look at September, when schools reopen, when things go back to whatever that they go back to, that we have instilled the confidence that, we weren't when things got tough, we just disappeared.
Those of you in Colorado know that we are a special district. So we function differently than the typical municipalities. So as you think across the country about all the different scenarios that could be going on, ours is different from a municipal situation. I will say it's a double-edged sword. Right now we are not in bad shape. Once we were able to lay off and furlough all of our part-time staff, which are really directly related to the programming that brings in the revenue. So the revenue and expense kind of is a wash. We'll take a little bit of a hit, but it won't be near as bad as those of you who rely on sales tax for funding for your communities. But in the long term, I think that's when we're really going to get hit. So while we're okay in weathering a little bit of this now, we really do have to change the way we think about how we're going to fund ourselves and how we're going to organize ourselves and what programs and facilities and services we can offer going forward as the property tax begins to drop off over the course of the next 3 years. In fact, working with our accounting service, we're assuming that at least for mountain recreation, we're going to hit a significant dip of probably 20 to 30% property tax assessed valuation drop in about 2023, 2024. I think it technically hits in 2024, but we certainly want to make sure that we're planning in some extra support and funding into our bottom line and into our fund balance to cover for that and making adjustments operationally to plan for that to happen. But I will say one of the smart things that we did and a unique opportunity for us is that, you know, our county went early with COVID response and closing everything down, and we got hit hard and fast early. And so we're actually ahead of the curve in terms of opening everything up now. But we put our communication staff, we loaned them out to the county. And so rather than having to wait for FEMA money or any reimbursement that we could get, we actually got those 2 salaries paid for 2 months through the county by allowing them to work on county communications, which was a benefit to them because thinking differently about not talking government type language, but instead more fun and progressive and comfortable rec language was actually an easy way to get the COVID information out to folks. And it just gave them a whole different look at how they communicate and interact with the community. So it was really a win-win for us to help us out with, I think we ended up getting about $25,000 in coverage that we don't have to wait for. The CARES Act was tricky for a special district. We were not originally eligible through the CARES Act. Even though we are a local government, we were not seen as an eligible entity. Our local Colorado Special District Association went to bat and has now gotten us to a place where special districts are eligible for that.
You know, Danny was talking about, you know, kind of the partnerships and getting to know. One of the things when I was a, you know, Parks and Rec director, you know, involved in Parks and Recreation, you know, I think the relationships that you build with, you know, police and fire, you know, your EMS folks is, you know, is invaluable. I know on 2 occasions, you know, the Parks and Recreation Department was really kind of left kind of in the outer circle instead of in the inner circle. And in both cases, the police chief and the fire chief both said, wait, these guys need to be at the table. They have community centers. They have tons of part-time employees who all know the community, know the children, know the families in their communities around their community centers, and they need to be engaged because they can get the word out faster than any of our police officers or any of the fire department. So really cultivating those relationships. You don't necessarily need to elbow your way onto the table. A lot of times you get pulled in by, you know, those who are perceived to be of greater value in the time. So.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I know that we had an Operation Recreation Response Committee meeting last week that, you know, Donna's leading that for GP Red. And we had a lot of discussions, and this is not directly funding related, but it is, where we were talking about the idea of this is a natural disaster, so it is being added to a lot of the work that we're doing with the ORR manual and preparation and response. And obviously this is so many different things around this. So we've been talking about how much we incorporate that. But the aspect of the volunteer corps that we've been talking about for years really has kind of morphed into the mutual aid concept. And so we were having lots of discussions about how various states have mutual aids already set up for police and for fire and for different pieces, but recreation is not necessarily written into that mutual aid concept. And so going forward and talking to our agencies specifically about saying, hey, are you part of the mutual aid?
agreements, because what's happening is, and what we had some members, I think Dan Hernandez was going to join us, talking about sharing. Some communities have lifeguards ready to go, and other communities are not opening their pool. So in this situation, rather than having the lifeguard laid off, what they can do is send them over to the next door neighbor community. And so, and it is as simple as even next door, sometimes they're operating under different restrictions based on, who the mayor is, or, all of these issues that everybody's dealing with. And so from the mutual aid standpoint, helping people realize that financially, if you have had to furlough staff, or certain things are still not open and may not be open for a while, are there other agencies that could use those staff members, and especially if they're nearby, if you're in an urban community. And so just really talking about how we can share the importance of mutual aid, not only for us and bringing people in, but also making sure for the staff who have been potentially laid off or not working because we don't have things open, how can we help them find places so their income levels can continue.
And Teresa, I was just going to say, I know it's different, but in the university world, I've heard from several people I know that what universities are going to do is start furloughing all of their employees for 1 day a month. And some of them are indicating they'll save as much as $1 million each month. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what somebody's math is. But they're telling people you're going to be furloughed once a month for the next 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing so many agencies. I mean, especially when the budget cut, when somebody comes down and it comes the edict from above, you must cut your budget by 10%, 20%, et cetera, immediately. The thing we want to try and help people do is not have the knee-jerk response where they're just cutting everybody by 10%, because it may not make sense, right? And so it's part of the cost recovery and resource allocation work that we do, but those same concepts apply here.
Yeah, this is Justin Cutler, City of Seattle. Thank you for coordinating this call, Teresa and everyone. And I think I'd just like to add, one of the things that we've been doing, to your point about mutual aid and just shifting staff around, is we've gone into a hiring freeze, and that's saved a substantial amount of money, but it's also left a large gap as we're trying to backfill different positions. But we've been able to rotate our resources and our staff to do shelters. We have hygiene showers at several sites. We are also offering emergency childcare, and that's been a good way to manage that resource kind of internally. But to your point about cost cutting, one of the things that we're looking at doing is just how we reopen. A lot of our facilities, they're closed now due to COVID, and it's a matter of when do you reopen facilities. So instead of just everybody saying, hey, we're going to reopen and we're going to reopen all of our facilities, I think taking a phased approach. And I think Mountain Recreation has done something similar, but we have 26 sites, so it's a little bit easier for us to kind of scale. And so as we look at retirements that we have already on the books, 3 or 4 retirements at our center coordinator level, then we're able to shift staff around. And then we're also looking at our CIP closures. And so sites that we already had capital projects planned in as part of our capital replacement program. So we're going to be remodeling a center. We're just going to leave that one closed a little bit longer and not reopen it, as a way to kind of message to the community that it's, that we had a CIP project already planned. We aren't going to reopen this site. It's going to save us some money and allow us to reopen a different site that's still close by and allow us to offer services. So, I think that's something that communities can look at as just as far as a cost savings tool, is what if we look at this differently? As I know that the government and public health may say that we need to be reopening, but we still have a choice, right? And we still have a choice as to how we reopen, and not allowing others to dictate that choice, but systematically thinking through, how are we going to reopen? Why are we going to reopen? How do we apply an equity lens, and making sure that we are reopening to help communities that have been disserved historically, or may have greater health disparities as exacerbated by COVID, and making sure that we are opening those sites first. And then how are we redirecting staff not only to do indoor activity, but then do outdoor activity in sites that are still closed? So I think it can be a combination of a lot of different factors, especially in larger urban areas where you have the choice to maybe scale and respond differently.
This episode of GP Red Presents is part of a GP Red special initiative called Operation Recreation Response. with a focus on helping agencies prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. If you are interested in becoming involved with ORR, please email info@gpred.org.